Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I continue my Haruki Murakami series with his fourth novel, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. In general, I'll just cut to the chase. I still can only give this 2 out of 5 stars like the previous 3. However, I will say that for its genre, it does step it up a little bit. And not only because it's much longer than the previous 3, it's 400 pages, at least in this vintage paperback. But Murakami gives us a lot more material to deal with. Some of the stuff I'll talk about in this video will be spoiler. So if you don't want it spoiled, then go ahead and turn this off. This book represents a shift to the techno thriller genre. And if I'm looking at this correctly, it was originally published in 1991. It's introducing us to, computers and technology and information, data. Although it's interesting to note that nobody has a personal computer at this point. That'll come more towards the end of the 90s, of course. We get a lot of philosophy of mind sewn into this novel, which I really like. Murakami has definitely done his work. He has read up or absorbed in some way a lot of the thoughts in the area that is now called philosophy of mind. A lot of things dealing with parallel worlds and how the mind works, core consciousness, immortality, time, space, things like this. So it's a real step into, like I said, the techno thriller and more of a sci-fi. It also has very much the feel of a Philip K. Dick novel. It's definitely indebted to PKD. There again is an animal symbol, just like the previous book. We have the sheep. Now we have a unicorn. Now, let me stop right there. When I realized that we were talking about unicorns and that there was this alternate world, which is referred to as the end of the world, as the title suggests, these are 2 different places. There's a Hard-Boiled Wonderland, which has links to Alice in Wonderland and Going Down the Rabbit Hole, and then the End of the World, which has many tight plot links. But when I realized there was like this fantasy world that was sort of like an early version of Game of Thrones. There's this huge wall, it's very snowy, characters who have lived there for a while get very wary of winter coming on. They all but say winter is coming and all this stuff. I'm not sure when George R.R. Martin's book came out. I think it was in the 90s. But in any case, I don't know that Murakami was up on that, if it came before. But anyway, that's not really my thing. I didn't like Game of Thrones. I don't like stuff that's about fantastical creatures and all this. So I wasn't sure if I was going to really be able to connect with this. But luckily that is offset by the Hard-Boiled Wonderland, where we get another protagonist slash narrator who is very much in the vein of Murakami. Even though he's this information processing specialist working for this tech company that they refer to as the System or Calcutech or something. He is a Calcutech, and they're rivals of what they call the Factory or the Semiotechs, who purportedly steal data while his company protects it. But anyway, he's still this like sort of indifferent, laissez-faire character who loves to drink whiskey and listen to jazz and classical records and read books and eat. Eating is all through this book. We'll get back to that. So anyway, as far as like the fantasy stuff and the introduction of unicorns especially, that kind of left me scratching my head as to really where this was going. That's not really my thing, but at the same time, someone got me really well on that, and they checked me. And I always think about this now. But I was in a discussion with a work colleague, and I was just expressing the fact that I really wasn't into, fantastic creatures and all this stuff. And first they checked me by saying, yeah, but you're always talking about Faust Part 2. And they kind of got me there. And then they said, but I tell you what about fairies? And of course I scoffed, but they were leading me. And I said, no, I'm not really interested in reading books about fairies. And they could have checked me again with Edmund Spenser, but guess what? I haven't read that, The Fairy Queen. Anyway, they said, I want to challenge you to read Little Big. And let me tell you, I went and read Little Big, which directly has fairies in it, and that is one of the most beautiful novels I have ever read. I highly recommend it. So, because of that experience, I pressed on. One of the things they do in here, it's pretty cool, is they alternate the Hard-Boiled Wonderland chapters with the End of the World chapters. The Hard-Boiled Wonderland is in the first person past tense, and the End of the World is in the first person present tense. Like I said, we get into philosophy of mind and consciousness. Now, it's hard to really rate this that came out in 1991 with me reading it in 2019, because here I am, I've seen Inception, I've seen Interstellar, I've read through the essays in Daniel Dennett and Douglas Hofstadter's collection The Mind's Eye, which includes the famous piece from Thomas Nagel about the bat, and I've read the stories of Ted Chiang, which includes one on memory and multiple personalities across parallel universes that is incredible. And then Borges, of course, especially Shakespeare's Memory, where a character somehow also takes on all the memories of Shakespeare, but now he's got two different personalities, and it's hard to delineate which memory belongs to which. It's utterly fascinating. And well rendered. So I had to keep putting myself back in the early 90s and comparing it against Murakami's previous three novels. And when I did that, I gained an appreciation. In a nutshell, what he's doing here is he has created this character who has three different core consciousnesses. And all of this, by the way, is in detail spelled out. That's one of the things that irked me about the novel, and it's a little insulting to the reader, but Murakami seems to want to explain every single thing that's going on, even if he's already given us abundant clues and we can connect these things for ourselves. Nonetheless, this guy in this one physical being inhabits these multiple consciousnesses, and some of them have junctions to the others, but now there's this new application that's introduced to him that's kind of wrecking the whole thing. So a good halfway through the book, you will realize that the consciousness in Hard-Boiled Wonderland is within the same being as the End of the World. This is really cool because there are these cool little parallel links with the librarian girl and so on, and Murakami brings in the very special bond of music and memory, which is one of the things I loved about Proust's great novel. He had that recurring leitmotif from a symphony, or really it was like a chamber music piece that would constantly call up things, just like the Madeleine dipped in lime blossom tea. Anyhow, one thing that's cool is he takes Zeno's paradox about not being able to ever escape a room, because if you think about the distance between yourself and the door as a number line in mathematics, you can infinitely subdivide that distance. So the distance between 0 and 1 is an infinity. 1 and 2 is an infinity. So if you keep dividing your distance by half, you'll never reach the door. Therefore, you're in a paradox, of infinity. And this crazy scientist guy figures out how to do that with a person's core consciousness, so that you can constantly, instead of trying to take the stops off of finite space and time, and instead of trying to transcend it, or step outside of time, he realizes that another way to achieve immortality is to subdivide perpetually. We continue Murakami's trademark omission of proper names. I don't think anybody has a proper name. It's the professor, the chubby girl, the librarian, the gatekeeper, and so on. I don't think even a single proper name is used in here. One pet peeve of mine is when there are these extended narrative passages that all they do is move characters or a character from point A to point B. And it seems like so many of these pages are wasted on that fluff. I mean, there's nothing intrinsic to the plot. There's nothing phenomenal that happens. It's just pure narrative. About climbing a hill and almost falling, and walking through the woods, and an endless narrative about what was over here in the south, and the wall here, and the clock tower to the east, and all this. And it's, I mean, maybe for some people this really does something for them, but even in movies, I get tired of these endless passages that really are just padding time and trying to delay some kind of epiphany. So maybe the time passage works by making me almost bored to tears and heavy-lidded, and then all of a sudden something cool happens, so it's even that much bigger. But I just feel like those could be trimmed down. I don't really like to read narratives of people just getting from point A to point B. He mentions a lot of writers, again in here, much more than any of the previous books. I always like noting writers that appear in books. And so I made a little list of all of them that are mentioned, and it's a pretty good list. Proust, Hemingway, Borges, Conan Doyle, Pliny, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Stendhal, Conrad, Hardy, Malm, Salinger, Camus, Flaubert, and Balzac. Like I said, we have a shift into that Philip K. Dick feel. It maintains this sense of conspiracy, this sense of paranoia, this sense of what's going on, who's the real person, and so on. Back to eating. There is a ton of passages, scenes of eating with very detailed descriptions of the food and how it's prepared. And there's more coffee drinking in this book than an all-night LAN party or an all-night programming binge, which is kind of funny. But then I thought about it, and really this tactic of constantly having the narrator eating and drinking is really a good way to keep that character pinned to reality, to keep that character very believable for us. I mean, as we're reading this, you and I, as far as we know, we're not existing across parallel consciousnesses and all this stuff, and unicorns aren't an everyday thing for us, and so on. So a great way to really keep us grounded in the novel is to have the character doing these everyday things, such as eating. The other thing that, another way we could look at it, to take some more literary theory, is that, eating food in literature is very tightly coupled to intercourse. And the character, the narrator, over and over, his either attempts at or propositions to have intercourse are thwarted and delayed. So instead there's all this eating in a way that sort of takes the place until the very end, of course. Another thing I thought was funny about the constant mastication and imbibing of coffee and whiskey, and beer for that matter, is that in the end, the girl that the narrator really idealizes as the one he wants to be his girlfriend, not the chubby girl who's young and throwing herself at him and wanting to be experienced. She's basically a male fantasy character. Well, almost every girl in Murakami so far is a male fantasy. But anyway, it was funny to see that this idealized girl has something called gastric dilation that allows her to eat and eat and eat and eat and not really gain weight or anything, not really go anywhere. So yeah, male fantasy right there, or really anyone's fantasy, even for myself. But it's just funny that this would be this narrator's ideal girlfriend. He's clearly consumed with consuming, and so his ideal girlfriend would be one that can eat endlessly. He does drop us again in medias res. The elevator continued its impossibly slow ascent. So we have this feeling of being dropped right into the middle of something, and we stay there for quite a while, which of course with any good sci-fi thriller genre novel is the way to do it. I also like how Murakami is bringing in more and more of this incongruity of either two objects or the action and the thoughts or words or conversation. And what I mean is it's got this very Quentin Tarantino feel, like Pulp Fiction, where, you know, Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta can be in someone's apartment, you know, getting ready to kill them and kidnap one of them, but they're just talking about the Big Kahuna Burger. And then in the drive thereafter, you know, he's asking him, you know what the French call a quarter pounder, a royale with cheese and all this, because of the metric system. There's a lot of that kind of feel in here. You know, these things are happening, like when the narrator's apartment is getting trashed, you know, he just kind of kicks back with the beer and kind of takes it all in, and things like that. And just so I like this, and even the chapter titles for the Hard-Boiled Wonderland portions always juxtapose three different things that feel like one of those problems from school where you're supposed to circle the thing that doesn't belong. Like this one is Whiskey Torture Turgenev, Dressing Watermelon Chaos, Skull Lauren Bacall Library. So that has a good feel to it. In the end, I wondered where Murakami would take all of this, because he does bring in strong philosophy of mind, and then playing with time and consciousness. I will just sum it up by saying that it ends with a token towards solipsism, and us being the gods of our own selves. In the end, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. This is the fourth novel of Haruki Murakami. This is my fourth novel of his, unless you count my long ago reading of Norwegian Wood, which actually comes next. So I hope you guys are enjoying the series. Like I said at the beginning, I'll still give this 2 out of 5 stars, which on Goodreads means, you know, it was just okay. And I hope you join me for the next video after I read Norwegian Wood.